Hey everybody, happy NBA Finals Day. We made it here to the game day of game two of the NBA Finals. Excited to have you all back on this podcast. Believe it or not, this is episode number 150. I'm so excited that you guys have joined me this evening for another podcast. We're getting into some very exciting times in the world of basketball. The Olympics are not too far away. Free agency is not too far away. The draft. So this is a very exciting time, very busy. But in this podcast specifically, we're diving into basically what has happened in the finals to this point, and then we're going to get into a little bit of what we expect to happen in game two, and then going forward from there for the rest of the series. But it's my pleasure this evening to have Rohan from the Gyro Step podcast over on Blue Wire Pods, guys. He does some really great work over there for the Bucks. Great coverage over there. Had your other host on the other day. With Ty. So Ty is a great guy, and he does some really great work for the pod too. But basically brought these two guys together now. I've had both of you on the pod, so I think your podcast is well represented at this point. But excited to have you on, man. Thanks for offering your time to this podcast this evening. Before we get started, what have been your thoughts of the Bucks' run so far? Before we get into the finals, anything kind of stand out to you specifically from how they've done so far in this postseason, maybe compared to past postseasons?
The resiliency is really what stood out to me for the Bucks this postseason. In years past, especially under the Budenholzer era, they've only won series by winning 4 straight games. We've never seen them go through any sort of struggles or anything like that. They came into this postseason, series 1, which feels like ages ago, against their old friends, the Miami Heat, and just they exercised their demons in that series. Then they faced a Brooklyn Nets team who was obviously hampered, but you can only play the team that's in front of you. And They went down 0-2. They had a humiliating loss in game 2, blew a game 5, and somehow managed to win that series. Lost Giannis in the conference finals for 2 games. He's back. Just this team has gone through the ups and downs this postseason, and they're still standing somehow, to my disbelief, honestly. But they're here. So the resiliency is what's really stood out to me compared to previous years.
I love that answer, and that's something I've noticed as well. And we're going to get into that definitely as we kind of get a little deeper into this matchup and how both teams got here. So before we get into that content, guys, there's a few sponsors for Unwrapped Sports that we like to shout out. The first of which is being teespring.com. So we have a link on the ticker at the bottom that allows you guys access to all of the products that we on the network have available for you guys to purchase. So that's accessories, that's clothing, whatever you guys are looking for to kind of support our podcast and represent us wherever you go. That's where you're going to find it, teespring.com/store/unwrapped. I have t-shirts available. I have some stickers. If you guys want to rep BCB, feel free to do so using that code there, that link down there at the bottom. Second of all, we have a VIP program available at patreon.com/unwrappedsports. So that's going to allow you guys to get more involved with our network. Specifically, if you want to get access to potentially being entered into a drawing to win some memorabilia in our highest tier of the VIP program. And then some other benefits like getting exclusive access with us and forums and things like that. That's going to be a little bit lower tiers. But basically, however you guys want to support us, that's going to be available down there using the patreon.com link. We'd really appreciate you guys if you're looking to support our podcast as we go forward, trying to deliver the best sports coverage out here on the internet. Also, we have mybookie.ag. That code USN100 is going to get you guys 100% sign-up bonus. It's going to double your first deposit. So if you're looking to get into betting for basketball, whatever sport you're interested in, that's going to be available over at mybookie.ag. So be sure to do that today if you guys have thought about dipping your toes into the water for that front. Lastly, we have rxhemp.com. rxhemp-usn is going to be the code that gets you 10% off your entire order. So if you guys are looking to get some of their recovery products, if you're having a little bit of soreness, things like that, after your sporting activities, be sure to use that link, and that's going to get you a little bit of a discount. So their products are really good. I've heard from other people on the network. Be sure to check that out if you guys want to get a little bit of a boost coming off of some of your sporting activities. So with that addressed, Rohan, let's get into how these teams got here, basically. I wanted to kind of take like an overview of these teams' journeys to the finals and then get more specific and then more into a deep dive later on as we look at what these teams are going to try to accomplish going into a game 2 and then later on in the series. But really, I want to kind of go back to your point earlier, what you made about the Bucks specifically, about the resiliency. And that's something that really stood out to me when we're going back to the series against Brooklyn specifically. I mean, that went 7 games. That was a grind of a series. PJ Tucker getting matched up against KD, just giving his heart and soul every night to try to slow that guy down. We know that's pretty much impossible a lot of the times, but he made life as difficult on KD as he could. The entire team giving everything they had through the ups and downs. Chris Middleton with the ups and downs of the shooting game and Holiday, and they still made it to the other side. And I was reading a piece earlier, I think it was by Seth Partnow, talking about the Bucks with their shooting woes. That has really impressed me because they've had a lot of games where they were subpar shooting from three compared to the regular season performance. So despite all of that, they've made it here, and they're very impressive going into Game 2 of the finals. But, any other thoughts that you wanted to offer for this team kind of going from the first round to now? I know that the Heat didn't offer much resistance, but the Brooklyn series is really impressive. And then going forward, against the Hawks, that was really impressive as well. And I just want to give this team props because I didn't think they'd make it here. But despite all the weaknesses that they've kind of displayed to this point and kind of teetering on the edge of the collapse a few times, they've managed to come through representing the Eastern Conference this year.
Yeah, I think the shooting thing that you highlighted is very key because they are one of the worst three-point shooting teams to ever make the finals. I think they're the lowest three-point shooting team to make the finals since the 04 Pistons. I think I got that from that same Seth Partnow piece, which was fantastic.
Yeah,
it's been an absolute struggle considering this team has traditionally been a decent to good three-point shooting team throughout the regular season. And it's just sort of frustrating to see this team just struggle so much, to put this ball in the basket in the NBA playoffs. So far, they've had their ups, they've had their downs. Game 2 or 3 against Miami, they put on an absolute shooting clinic. They're up and down. You mentioned Chris Middleton being especially up and down. He really struggles early on in series. It takes him a couple games to get going. Jrue Holiday has really struggled shooting the ball this postseason. His best shooting performances came against Atlanta in the latter part of the conference finals when they really needed him to step up when Giannis wasn't there. It's amazing that they're at this point. I mentioned this earlier, but for a team to shoot this poorly and have so much of their offense predicated on shooting and having this sort of struggle and still making it to the NBA finals is a testament to their defense, because that's what they pride themselves on. Is their defense. They're a defense-first team. They know that even if they're not shooting the ball well, they can get stops on the other end. And that's what they've done. You mentioned PJ Tucker. Like, you can't do much against Kevin Durant. You can only pray and hope that he misses sometimes. And Pretty much. Did the best that they could. Yeah. And they've just been trying to take out stars in terms of make sure their lives are difficult on the offensive end by using their defense. It's just they've been predicating themselves on their defense. And as the old saying goes, defense wins championships. Phoenix Suns, Milwaukee Bucks have been the two best defenses so far in the postseason. And that's why they're here.
Exactly, man. This number one playoff defense for the Bucks is really impressive. 105.6 defensive rating to this point. That's actually just 1 point better, as you talked about the Suns being right there, right behind, 1 point behind them in defensive rating to this point is really incredible. And I think part of the reason why they've been able to do so well defensively is because they're a little more flexible in their coverages this year. We saw in years past, they kind of stuck with that drop scheme in the pick and roll. They didn't want to get into switching. Bud was hesitant to do that. And it really burned them a lot of times going back the last 2 seasons. But as we saw with this season, they were willing to make adjustments. The defensive rating suffered a little bit. They got away from being like a top 3 defensive team. They dropped down to closer to the bottom of the top 10. But as a result, the experimentation and the practice that they got earlier this season has paid off now, because now when they're forced to go to other defensive coverages, they're not caught off guard. It's not unfamiliar to them. They're used to doing it. And I really want to give Brook Lopez credit in that last series when they went to a switching scheme almost every possession, because I think it would have been easy for him to just kind of, get exploited every possession, but he held his own. And that's really incredible to see from a guy that across the league we think of as being immobile, slow on his feet and things like that. But switching over to the Phoenix side for a second, I think that, they've employed a lot of those same schemes getting to this point defensively. Ayton is good in space. He can do a lot on his part. Their wings are incredible. Bridges, Cam Johnson are really good on that end. Chris Paul heads the a lot of their efforts defensively. And I just think they've been kind of tied in as a unit on both ends. And you can see that as we go from game to game. They know who they are. The starting lineup has got a lot of time together, as I'm going to reference here in a little bit. But I think that, it's really great to see two teams thriving defensively, because in today's NBA, we get to thinking of like 3-point shooting is all that. And, teams scoring 110, 120 points a game. And we're still seeing that, but defense is very important. And I don't think that's lost either of these two teams. It's no coincidence that the best defensive teams are still here. It helps them weather the storms of offensive inconsistencies and shooting discrepancies that we see from game to game.
For sure. Phoenix's wing defenders are incredible. Like you mentioned, Bridges, Crowder, and even Booker, for someone who's not shown in years past the greatest effort on the defensive end, he's locked in this postseason. He is not taking one-on-one matchups. He's taking those personally. You saw it against the Clippers. Paul George was trying to go at him. It's no, I'm going to hold my own here on these possessions for the most part. They tried to target him. He was the quote-unquote weakest defender in that lineup, and he's still a pretty damn good defender on his own right. So he can do what he wants on the defensive end. Chris Paul, he's small, he's old, he has his physical limitations, but he's still an incredibly intelligent team defender. Everyone on that team is incredibly intelligent team defender. You just mentioned DeAndre Ayton, great in space. Imagine saying that 2 years ago. That was incredible as a testament to his work ethic. He's really shown me a lot during this postseason run, just how much he's evolved on the defensive end. And this entire team sort of cohesing on the defensive end. They play as a unit, like you mentioned. It's beautiful to see, really. They play beautiful basketball on both ends of the court. And it's why they're here. Just like Milwaukee, they play as a team, they play as a complete unit. And that's why they're here.
For sure. And I don't think we can kind of get to this point without talking about the veteran leadership of Chris Paul, and even on the Bucks side, PJ Tucker being thrown into the mix. With those two guys, I think that an effect that bringing veterans in that we don't really give enough credit sometimes is just the little things that the little parts of wisdom they can give to the younger players that haven't been in those positions before. CP3, I'm sure he's given Booker some tips on defense, not just offense, the entire roster. DeAndre Ayton taking that leap. Everywhere Chris Paul goes, the young guys get better. Their growth gets accelerated. And I think that's why that even though the Suns have a younger roster, they're still thriving here. I know for me personally, I didn't have them going this far because I didn't think that this roster was ready to take that next jump between Bridges and Johnson and Ayton. I figured they needed at least another year to kind of get ready for the big stage. But obviously I was wrong. They proved a lot of us wrong. And I think the veterans do a great job of kind of just putting their handprints all over these teams. There's no coincidence that they're here. But looking a little bit deeper into game one and what we've seen transpire so far, I think that it's very important to highlight how the Suns got the better of the Bucks in that game. And I think one word describes it: isolation. And we've already referenced this, in our talks leading up to this point. I think that the Bucks are a really good defensive team, but they still have guys that individually can be taken advantage of. And for all the good that Brook Lopez has done in space, there's still not a whole lot he can do against Chris Paul, one of the best mid-range assassins in the game's history. It's just really tough to kind of keep him in check. And Chris turned on the Jets in the second half. In the third quarter, he got Milwaukee for 6 of 7 shooting, 16 points. And then the Suns took a 16-point advantage into the fourth that they never relinquished. So I think that's a part of the game that the Bucks are going to need to kind of key in on a little bit more going forward. But in your opinion, how does Milwaukee combat that? So should they just double down on the switching and just hope that Chris and Book are a little bit off on their shooting? Or do you think they should go to more of a hedge-heavy scheme, try to trap a little bit more? I know that brings other risk into the picture, but in your opinion, how does Milwaukee handle that, those two guys operating in space so well?
Well, I think a lot of that comes down to, like you said, how hot are CP and Book? Because if we're being Brook Lopez, he wasn't incredibly bad in isolation. He did get roasted a few times, and that's because of quickness. He got beat on drives a few times, but they always have like backside help with Giannis. But he was doing a good job or a decent job. I won't say good job. He was doing a decent job of holding his own and trying to smother CP and Book on mid rangers. Those guys are just like, especially CP. He was just in his zone. Like, he was the most dominant player on the court in game one, and there's not much you can really do against that. We talked about the same thing with Kevin Durant. You just got to hope he misses sometimes when he's locked in like that. You just got to make life a little more difficult. And I think that starts with Drew Holiday. If you're going to maybe stay away from switching 1 through 5 immediately, which was a little bit of a surprise considering against Atlanta and Trae Young, they came out switching 1 through 4 and eventually went to switching 1 through 5. In this series, they came out of the gate switching 1 through 5. But if you go back to switching 1 through 4, you gotta get Drew Holiday involved in the action more. You gotta get him to fight over screens more, because he's just dying on screens. They're soft switching really hard. You got to show more. You've got to, maybe vary up your schemes a little bit. You can't just show them the same thing possession after possession, especially against a guy like Chris Paul, who's just going to pick it apart once he sees it more than once in a row.
Right.
So you got to switch it up. You got to vary the coverages. You got to throw waves of defenders at him. You just have to switch it up. You have to always keep him thinking, which again, that's not great because Chris Paul is like one of the most intelligent basketball players of all time. So you're going to get beat in the long game on that. So you have to make sure he's always thinking. You can't let him get comfortable in that sort of sense. And they did a decent job on Booker. He got to the free throw line a ton. He got 10 free throw attempts in that game. But like, he only shot, 8 of 21 from the field. He was 1 of 8 from 3. They had PJ Tucker shadowing him a lot in that game, and he did a great job. Like, PJ Tucker is an elite defender. He can go from guarding like Kevin Durant to now he's chasing around Devin Booker. Like, he brings that versatility that you were mentioning earlier. So it's realistically like, you have to pick your poison in these games because you have one Drew Holiday and you have one PJ Tucker. You can't just be asking like Drew Holiday, okay, now we're going to go put you on Devin Booker. Now it's like, okay, do you want PJ Tucker guarding Chris Paul? Like, that's not an ideal matchup. This is where the loss of Dante DiVincenzo really kicks in here, because he's not someone who's going to go get attacked on the defensive end. And he's really good at attacking screens, getting through them, making life hell for the offensive player. And unfortunately, he went down in the Miami series. So you're really seeing the repercussions of that, because if you want to go small, you're going to have to put a guy like Bryn Forbes out there or Pat Connaughton. Pat Connaughton more so is a better defender, but Bryn Forbes is just getting attacked, and he's not even providing much on the offensive end. So it's really like roster limitation at that point. And you just have to hope that Chris Paul has, maybe an off night is a lot to ask for, but maybe like an average night from Chris Paul.
Yeah, that'd be a huge drop from what he's been doing recently, because especially in fourth quarters and in closeout games, he's borderline unstoppable. He finds ways to kind of impose his will on the game. And yeah, I think I would totally agree with your analysis on Drew Holiday specifically. He is one of the major keys to winning the series. He has to be peak Drew Holiday if the Bucks want to pretty much take home the trophy. 4 of 14 in game one offensively, didn't make any 3-pointers out of his 4 attempts. And it begs the question, is Holiday wearing down from the defensive strain that is put on him every game? Because we see in the last series, it was Trae Young. In this series, it's Chris Paul and Booker. These are some of the toughest guards in the NBA to kind of keep in check night to night. And I mean, the Bucks do ask a lot of him, the switching, the pounding sometimes that he takes if he's matched up against a big. He does a lot every night. And, I'm worrying that since he has to do so much on that end, that his offense suffers as a result. You see him a little less aggressive offensively, going to the hole. There's a couple of times in that game where he did that. He kind of got Chris on him or Booker and went into the paint. That's what he does at his peak. That's peak Drew Holiday in a nutshell. But we didn't really see that consistently. I remember in the Hawks series, he kind of fell into a trap of going isolation and jacking up some shots from mid-range. Yeah, he can make them, but that's not where he does his best work. So do you feel like that might be playing a part in why Drew Holiday is becoming, he's been less efficient than we expect from him in this postseason?
I think it is. I think all of our minds are a little bit clouded from that Portland series a few years ago that he's infamous for, where he's like attacking the offensive end and also like shutting down Damian Lillard. Like that's a lot to ask for, and that was one series. Like that's what was that? That was a 4-game series. This is game like 17 or 18. I don't even remember at this point. They're in the NBA finals. Like it's not a first round matchup anymore. Like.
Right.
These things take a toll. My mind keeps going to that PJ Tucker quote during the Brooklyn series where he's like asked about his offense. He was like, man, I'm guarding Kevin Durant. What do you want? Like, I'm not going to provide much on the offensive end. I'm giving it all on the defensive end. That sort of thing applies, given PJ is a lot older than Drew Holiday, but that same sort of mindset applies. My thinking is like, if that's the case, why are you shooting like step back threes in this instance?
Exactly.
Like that's not your game. Why you shoot if that it doesn't go in the first time? Why are you throwing up 14 shot attempts when you're only making 4? Shout out 414. But you're just it's a lot of decision making questions. And given it's not as bad as we've had in the past at the point guard position, but it's still
shots at Bledsoe.
I'm trying not to.
I know it's hard. I know it's tough ask.
But it's inevitable. But Drew Holiday, like you mentioned, he can still get his shots when he needs to. He can still get down low and bully people down low. Like Chris Paul, he's much smaller than him, much less strong than him. Devin Booker, like he's like I mentioned earlier, a fine defender, but he's not as strong as Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday is a brick wall in terms of strength, so he can get that shot. It's very taxing, and you want him on the defensive end. And I think this team, like I mentioned earlier, predicates itself on the defensive end. So I think they'll live with that as long as you're not like gucking up the offense in terms of taking these shots early on in the shot clock. And it's not just him who's guilty of that. Like Chris Middleton does that, Brook Lopez does that, Giannis does that. All of them have their flaws on the offensive end in terms of not getting into a rhythm in the flow of the offense and jacking up early jumpers and stuff like that. These sort of things happen with this team, which is why we see them sort of go into lulls offensively a lot. But they do have the capability to turn it on. They do have the shooting power to turn it on. It's just a question of when and if.
Yep, absolutely. And it's kind of weird. I was just looking at the shooting numbers for game 1 from Milwaukee. It was almost like a reversal of what they've done recently. The outside shot was falling, but they had less success when it comes to interior attacks and paint points and things like that. As we just discussed, Holiday was pretty much a non-factor on that end. He barely made any shots that game. But I think a big reason why it's so difficult is like you're going against a guy, DeAndre Ayton, which brings a whole new dimension to rim protection. Capella did a great job on that front, but I mean, Ayton has been spectacular. He gobbled up 19 rebounds in that last game. He does a great job of just preventing second chance points. If he's in the paint, if he's in the lineup, he's finishing a lot of possessions defensively and this kind of preventing Milwaukee from getting extra opportunities. So, he's been a huge factor already. I mean, it's only been one game, but 22 and 19, he enforces his will in the game. Great rim protection option. As we mentioned before, in space, he's not going to get taken advantage of consistently. But this is a stat from StatHead on Twitter I found just before this podcast. It's really telling. He's had 5 games this postseason with 10 field goal attempts or more and 80% from the field or higher. So that's something that no player in the last 50 years has done, aside from, I think, 2. No other player has more than 2 games like that in a single postseason in the last 50 years, which – it goes to show you, I mean, we can say all we want about like draft selections, but like the Suns nailed this selection. In hindsight, you can say like, it's always easy to say things in the future, like you should have picked this guy or that guy, but the Suns knew what they were doing and he's paying dividends in this series. So I think while he's in the lineup, it's going to be really tough for Milwaukee to get good looks, but there is a kind of a factor in this equation, which makes it easier for the Bucks. Sarge is no longer going to be in this series due to his ACL tear, very unfortunate in the last game. So that brings in Frank Kaminsky to try to fill in his role a little bit. But what's interesting is like Frank didn't even play that much in the last game. He played 3 minutes and I think 53 seconds in the last game. So the Suns are going to go small, I guess, when Ayton's out of the game, but that's more opportunities for Milwaukee to try to assert their will. They got to win those minutes. when Ayton is out of the game, or else it's going to be a long night going forward for them. So that's something I think they can exploit, and I expect them to, and I expect Holiday to be better on that front once he realizes or kind of gets the idea in his mind that, like, hey, there's no rim protection. I can do what I do best, which is attack the rim and create easy points for my team.
Yeah, for sure. Really unfortunate for Dario Saric there. Like that's got to suck. Just 2 minutes in your first finals appearance. It's awful.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Hate that.
Like, yeah, feel for him. Aside from Ayton and even really Saric, like he wasn't really a positive on this, but Ayton was the only guy who was really a rebounder for this team. They are a very small team outside of DeAndre Ayton. And you mentioned Frank Kaminsky. He had to come in. He only played 4 minutes because immediately when he came in, they were just like, okay, we're going at this guy. We're going to go and attack this guy. And they're like, Monty Williams was like, okay, I guess DA, you're playing a lot more minutes than we thought you were.
Yep.
So that's really what it's going to come down to, is how much can DeAndre Ayton really play? Because as soon as he comes out of the game, Milwaukee is applying an insane amount of rim pressure. We saw that from the gate in game one. They're going at the rim right away, every single possession, every single trip down the floor, till they bring DeAndre Ayton back in. So it's really a question of how much can DeAndre Ayton play. And they'll still do that against DeAndre Ayton. Like, it's not like he's a he's a good defender in space, but it's not like we're talking about like prime Dikembe or anything. Like we're still like, they're still going to attack the rim. They still have the personnel to do so. It's going to be much more difficult than they've seen in recent series. Like you mentioned, Capella, he does a decent job. He's just small. He's smaller than you think. And it's just, Milwaukee is such a massive team that they can usually swallow up any other rim protectors, rim defenders. Ayton is just a massive human being and is a good defender. So it's really going to come down to how much Ayton can play. He played a shade under 39 minutes in game one. Is he going to crack 40? Is he going to go 42? Like, what's going to happen here? The only guy for the Suns who played more than 40 minutes was Devin Booker, and he was struggling from the field. So it's really going to come down to how much DeAndre Ayton can play. And that's predicated on how much Giannis can play, because we saw him cap out at around 35 minutes in that game. First game back from the knee injury that he somehow is still playing basketball from. Chris Middleton played 45 minutes. He's been seeing a lot of minutes in this postseason, but it really comes down to Giannis, because he's gonna be the primary attacker. So if he can play a lot of minutes, DeAndre Ayton's gonna have to play a lot of minutes, and one of those guys is gonna wear down. One of them has to wear down. It's really gonna come down to which one goes down first.
Yeah, I think you segued perfectly into like what we're going to be looking for going forward. And you actually just hit one of my points, which comes back to Giannis and how he's going to perform going forward. I think it's very, very encouraging to see that after game one, he said he feels great. He said he had no setbacks with his knee. It's honestly incredible. Like you just said, like you mentioned, the fact that Giannis is here playing a week after his leg, was in an angle that it should never be in. Completely blows my mind still just to think about that he's playing, let alone actually doing well. He was moved pretty well last game. I remember watching in the first quarter where he took Ayton off the dribble a couple times, got him under the rim on one possession, dunked on him. I was like, he looks normal. Like, this is not a guy that's severely limited physically, but I guess that's why he's the Greek freak, right? I mean, he didn't get that nickname for nothing. So that's Giannis in a nutshell. But going forward, you mentioned that he's at 35 minutes already after game one. Is he going to play more next game? I think it's possible. I think that the way Milwaukee uses him is going to be worth keeping an eye on. If he's going to be more paint oriented, or he's going to bring the ball up like we were accustomed to seeing him doing a lot of times. I was thinking going into this game that he was mainly going to operate out of the dunker spot and just finish lobs and be running pick and rolls as the roll man. But if he's moving this well, I think you can expand what he does during the game a little bit more. So that's definitely going to be worth keeping an eye on. But another kind of point that I wanted to bring up with you, because you know this better than a lot of people that watch the Bucks, Middleton's up and downs. 29 points in game one, 12 of 26 from the field. I'm scared, honestly. What's next for him? Because we've seen a lot of times after a good game, he goes back down to like 9 of 28 or something like that from the field. Like, I'm just curious, like, is he going to be able to sustain this? You just mentioned he's playing a lot of minutes. Are we in for a regression next game? I'm a little bit nervous from Milwaukee's side from that perspective.
Yeah, it's difficult to say. Early on, he seemed frustrated that he wasn't getting the whistle that he really wanted to. And, that's the game. You can't really do anything about that. So he started to, get in his head a little bit. But as soon as the game started to progress a little bit, get into the second half, he started to find his own rhythm within the game. That's just speaks to this entire team. It takes them a little bit to get accustomed to who they're playing against, which is odd for a Bucks team in this postseason. But you need to see him like sort of evolve throughout the game and throughout the series. It's interesting to see what they'll throw at him in game 2. They tried Torrey Craig on him a couple times in game 1, did not work whatsoever. It's just personnel. Mikal Bridges has been on him a lot. It's just like, I know Bridges is a fantastic defender. His arms are way too long for any normal human body proportions, but he'll get shots when he wants to. If you see Chris Middleton make like 2 shots in a row, you just better go cower for life, because he'll be an inferno and go full Boston Chris Middleton. But if he starts to get in his own head a little bit, that's when it's sort of, you get those 9 of 20 performances that you were talking about. You see the up and downs of Chris Middleton. That's his biggest weakness as a player, is just his consistency, because he's capable of being an incredible offensive player, taking games away from the opponents. And he's also capable of just sulking away into the offense. He'll still get shots up. He'll still try. That's something that he's worked on throughout his career. But if they're not going in, like they're really not going in. He's such a rhythm shooter. He's such a streaky shooter that it's sort of worrying, like you were mentioning. I'm a little worried too. Like, is he going to get the whistle that he wants? Because he's been driving a lot, getting a lot of contact, and no whistle. He attempted 26 shots and he got 0 free throw attempts in this game, in game 1, I should say. So is that going to regress? Is that going to regress a little bit? Is he going to, get hot earlier? Is he going to be third quarter Chris? Who knows? It's sort of like when is Chris Middleton going to show up in this game? If it's early, the Bucks can get a lead early, and they usually don't give up leads very easily. If it comes up late, is it going to be too little too late? That's the question that I'm going to be looking for in the first quarter of game 2.
Yeah, I think what happens in the first quarter of game 2 is going to tell us a lot about how the game is going to go in regards to Middleton's performance, Milwaukee's coverages, if they switch it up at all, how they pressure Paul and Booker. From Phoenix's side, I mean, there's another guy that, if we're talking about streaky shooters, I think Crowder fits into that category as well. He didn't make a shot last game. He was 0 for 8. I went back and looked at his numbers for the finals last year. He only shot 33% from 3. I mean, it's not terrible, but I mean, this is a guy that can be absolutely on fire or hitting nothing. And I think he falls into the same category as Middleton. If we're talking about rhythm shooters, this guy is a rhythm shooter. And I think 8 shots is just enough from on a steady diet of shot attempts to be able to get into a rhythm. It just wasn't his night. But the Phoenix has to feel good that they did so well with a guy like Crowder providing nothing from the shooting perspective. But I think that's the beauty of the Phoenix roster, and specifically their starters, is that they're multifaceted. They can score in so many different ways. They can guard in different fashions. So if one player is not really carrying their weight, so to speak, someone is there to pick up the slack. And I think it's a big reason why, their starting lineup is one of the best we've seen, this season, specifically the postseason. And, they just kind of fill all the holes perfectly. They don't really have a lot of weaknesses. So definitely Crowder is something I'm taking a hard look on. But he's a guy that doesn't really need to make shots to be impactful. He's so good on defense. He makes hustle plays. He gets rebounds. He does a little bit of everything. And, part of me is kind of like wishing that Miami hung on to him. I watched him a lot in last year's finals, as a Heat supporter. It's kind of tough to see sometimes, but, I mean, he's been a great veteran for this team, and there's a reason why he's playing the second straight finals. He brings something, a big impact to every team that he plays on, for sure. But how about Chris Paul? If we're talking about guys that we could see run down, take a look at these numbers for a second. 2,200 minutes he played in the regular season, 70 regular season games, almost 500 minutes in the playoffs so far. He's 36 years old. Do we see a regression from him next game after how many minutes he's played and how much he gave in game one just to give Phoenix a 1-0 lead?
Yeah, it's the question of really just Chris Paul overall in general. Every year it's like, oh man, this is it. He's retiring now after this year. Like, and then he just goes out there and he wins games. That's just what Chris Paul has done throughout his entire career. And it's just epitomized by this finals run. You might see that. You might see him slow down a little bit. He's probably not going to see this level of insane shooting and production. Like that was an all-time Chris Paul game. We're probably not going to see another game like that. Will we see a bad shooting night? I wouldn't bet for that because this is Chris Paul. This is his first finals. He's always got that motivation. So are we going to see like a regular Chris Paul game? I think we have a chance, and that's probably slowing down for him at this point. But I wouldn't count on too much of a regression. And in terms of Jay Crowder, he's the reason Milwaukee went home last season. And 0 of 8 from the field, 0 of 5 from threes. A lot of those were corner threes. And one interesting thing about this matchup is Phoenix likes to take a lot of corner threes. Milwaukee likes to not give up any corner threes. So you see a lot of these threes that Phoenix has taken. They haven't been super contested all season, all throughout this postseason. Milwaukee's contesting them. They're getting to those shooters in the corners. They're forcing them to go out and take deeper threes on the wing, top of the break, just those sort of threes, not corner threes. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic, is whether Phoenix sort of alters their offense a little bit to avoid the corners, the places Milwaukee likes to contest a lot, or do they go to where they're comfortable, which is the corners, and let Milwaukee play their defense against them? We saw in game one, like I just mentioned, Milwaukee got to those shooters. They got to them. They did make a couple of shots. Cam Johnson campaign, those guys were hitting their threes. It's a matter of who's hot realistically for the Phoenix Suns. Like you mentioned, they have so many options that they can really go to, which is why they're such a deep, deep team and such a good team. They have so many options that they can really go to. It's just a matter of how Milwaukee is going to adjust to that, how they're going to play them, and how Phoenix plays into Milwaukee's defense. Phoenix knows how Milwaukee is going to play in terms of what they want to give, what they want to give up. But that's what really Phoenix wants to get to, is what Milwaukee wants to take away. So it's going to be an interesting battle between Monty Williams and Coach Budenholzer, just to see who really breaks first.
That's what it comes down to, honestly. And corner threes are a huge diet for specifically, you just talked about Cam Johnson. He's deadly from that area and honestly all over the floor, all over from three. He's been shooting 45% in these playoffs. He was 2 for 4 last game. So he doesn't shoot a ton of threes, but man, is he accurate. Just taking 3 or 4, making 2 or 3, just a steady diet of threes. Defensively, he brings it. So, I put in my notes, he's been a beast, because I honestly think that's what he's brought to this team. And yeah, I mean, it's just really incredible to see how fast the young roster has coalesced for Phoenix. And it's almost like this battle of the past and maybe the future. The Milwaukee's been here for a few years. Not to say that they're a super old team. Giannis and Middleton and these guys have plenty of years left. But the Suns, this is like their first real foray into this kind of area. So it's like a battle between the vets and the new kids on the block, plus Chris Paul, of course. Chris Paul and Crowder, they've been around the block a few more times. But it's just really cool to see how fast the Suns have really built themselves up. And I think that's a credit to Monty Williams. And this coaching battle is going to be fascinating. It already is fascinating to see how they've been duking it out on each end. And I think Monty Williams, he was my vote for Coach of the Year. I don't know how you felt about that, but he's displaying how good he's been in this postseason because he's willing to change on a dime just like that. When a lineup change is needed, when a coverage change is needed, he's not afraid to do that. So I think going forward, Bud has taken a lot of strides on that end this year, I will admit. But, man, Monty might have the edge in this matchup. He's done so well so far. And honestly, if you have the coaching edge, it might not even matter if your roster is slightly worse, just because they're utilized better and they're optimized in this matchup. So definitely going to be worth keeping an eye on how they kind of run at each other. You mentioned the coverages between the corners. That's prime real estate in the NBA. We know all teams want to get a lot of shots from that area. So it's definitely going to be worth keeping an eye on how they perform. And from three, from the inside, let's see how Milwaukee operates in terms of getting more shots inside and getting better looks. And you talked about that earlier with Ayton. They're going to attack regardless, but it's going to be a challenge to try to get better shots in the paint there. But definitely a lot to look forward to. But if we're kind of looking forward to games 2 and forward, how do you see this playing out? If the Milwaukee can't get through tonight, do they have enough in the tank to kind of rally the Suns back in out of a 2-0 hole, or does Milwaukee need this game to kind of stay alive, honestly?
I mean, if you're Milwaukee, you'd really love to get game 2 because you get home court advantage back, and obviously you don't fall down to 0-2. We've seen them this postseason come back from an 0-2 deficit against the Nets. Circumstances are different, but it's still that mentality of, oh my God, we just got embarrassed on the road. How are we going to recover from this? Is everything over? Are we going to lose in the second round? That sort of resiliency that I led this podcast with. It's sort of like, how much does this team have left in the tank, like you were talking about? I think that even if they go down to 0-2, I would not count them out, given the odds would be very, very stacked against them. I would not count them out, though. Milwaukee has a solid home court advantage, just like Phoenix. Man, that crowd is incredible. Incredible. Yeah. It's great to see both of these cities just sort of giving the love to their teams and just, showing out for their teams that haven't been in this stage in decades. I should say, not just years. But yeah, like Milwaukee, if they want to take back home court, they really need to get this game. You really need to get this game if you want to make this a relatively easy series, as easy as you can possibly make it for yourself. Right. You really need to get this game, because if the Suns go up 0-2, they're a very, very confident team. They believe they can go out there and beat anyone, and they've shown that they can go out there and beat anyone. And of course, this is the NBA Finals. Like, you can't take anything for granted. These are the top tier opponents. If you give one step, they will pounce. And that's why Milwaukee needs to pounce. If Phoenix is willing to give a step on this game on their home court, Milwaukee really needs to take advantage of that. It's just who's going to come out blazing first. And if Phoenix comes out of the gates hot, how does Milwaukee respond? Are they going to dig in and sort of rally back like they tried to do in game 1 after a 20-point deficit, bringing it to, I believe, 7 at one point, given like a lot of the starters were out, but they still brought it to within a relatively close game. Can they show that same sort of heart, that same sort of soul on this team, get everything going? Are they going to flow on offense and get stops on defense for both teams realistically? Like, if there's a big lead, which team's going to give? That's what I think the story of this episode has been, is who's going to give. And for this series, which one is going to break first?
You're bringing up a really good point about who's basically, it's like perseverance. It's been a long season. It's been a long couple of seasons, honestly. It's become a war of attrition. So it's like this heavyweight fight that goes the distance. You get into the 9th round. It's like, okay, both opponents are really good. We know that. They've both prepared a lot to get here. They've gone through a lot. Sometimes it just comes down to just who has the will to just grind out a little bit more out of this to take home the win. I think that's what we're going to see in this series. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes the distance, if it goes to 7 games, it goes to the last quarter, the last minute of the last quarter, because that's how it's been, honestly, to get to this point. We've seen a lot of guys go down with injuries. We've seen a lot of unfortunate circumstances, but these guys have gotten to this point because this is the word of the day: resiliency. Just clawing through all of the dirt you have to do to get to this point. So I'd be really worried for Milwaukee if they do drop this game tonight. I look at a guy like Chris Paul, look at Booker, they're assassins. So they're going to see an opportunity to kind of close out in the coming games to really kind of put Milwaukee down for good. And I think that's where you get the best games. Chris Paul specifically, I think it was in the last 2 or 2 of the 3 like closeout games, at least in this postseason, he's been fantastic. So I think he's going to smell blood in the water, and he's going to jump if the Bucks give him that opportunity. But like you said, I mean, it's a long series. Anything can happen, and I think if you have a guy like Giannis on your side, you have the caliber of defense that we've referenced so many times. You at least have a chance. They can definitely work their way back. The Deerest District is hopping, man. I mean, Milwaukee is ferocious. The fans are out in force. I mean, they know it's been a long time coming. I mean, decades, like you said. So they're going to give the Suns all they can handle once they come back to Milwaukee. But I think that is kind of in a nutshell what we should expect from this series. And I think going into game 2, I'm very excited kind of to see what both teams bring to the table, because I think this is the epitome of like basketball today. What we love about it is the versatility, the shooting, the skill, and just everything in the package, that the pace. I mean, I'm sure you know this is too. At the beginning of game 1, it was like, don't take your eyes off the screen. You're going to miss something. So I think it's great for everybody, for us, for casual fans. I think it's great basketball, and I think it's part of the reason why we're seeing ratings jump out the roof. I think everybody's going to be a winner. Most people anyway. I don't know about the losing team, but there's going to be a lot of winners in this series, regardless of how this plays out. But I'm excited, man, honestly. So any last thoughts about how Milwaukee's going to go about this, or what you're looking for before we kind of close this out?
I think you just hit it right there. This is just fun. This is great. This is a fantastic series. This is incredible. This is what you want to see. High-level teams play high-level basketball. Everyone should just enjoy it, because this is going to be I think this is going to be a good series. Phoenix struck first. Let's see if Milwaukee can respond. I think they're capable. Will they is the question. Is Phoenix going to smell blood, like you mentioned? It's just there's a lot of storylines. These teams are linked forever. You can go to Torrey Craig this season. You can go all the way back to when these teams were introduced in the Kareem coin flip. It's just there's a lot of history between these two teams, between these cities, these players. Just it's fun. It's a fun series. Everyone seems to enjoy it, and this is what the NBA should be like. It's fantastic.
This is it right here. Still can't believe the Bucks gave away Torrey Craig for a couple of crackers and a bus pass. But hey, he wasn't
playing. He wasn't playing. Fit wasn't right.
Yeah.
And I think it was an agent favor, because he didn't have a role, and they're like, "We'll get you to a good team."
Yep. And I would say this is a good team, because they might win it all. So
yeah.
Kudos to that agent. He did his job for sure. But that brings us to the end of our conversation, everybody. I want to thank Rohan again for joining me on this podcast. It's been a great conversation, a lot of great insights into this series. And as we both kind of alluded to, I think there's a lot to look forward here to as we kind of watch the series evolve. But Rohan, before you go, man, why don't you shout out your podcast, plug anything you want to plug here. The stage is set for you before you head out this evening. What do you want to go ahead and just like to let the listeners know about before you go?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at RKATTIJR. You can follow the Eurostep Podcast Network on Twitter at GYRO Podcast. And just, we're pumping out a lot of Bucks coverage. If you're interested in team specific stuff, just the Blue Wire Network, we've been doing a lot of stuff. So just look out for that sort of content. That's all I have to say.
Fantastic, guys. Be sure to check those guys out. Blue Wire Pods, awesome coverage of the Bucks, and you can't really beat it if you're looking to get your fix on Milwaukee. So for business casual basketball, you can find us at BC Basketball 2 on Twitter and Instagram, and our website is bcbasketball.info. So we have new blog posts up right now you can look at, some other resources. So be sure to check that out as we go deeper into the playoffs and even in the off season. We're gonna have more coming your way. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Enjoy this evening. Enjoy Game 2, the rest of these playoffs. We'll be back next week with another special guest and more NBA analysis coming at you. But until then, take care, everybody, and we'll see you on the podcast here real soon.